Good evening. This is the Village of Lake Bluff Historic Preservation Commission, our regular monthly meeting. It's July 11th, 2018. We have a number of items on our agenda this evening, starting with the roll call, please.
Member Bergman.
Here.
Member Liebolt.
Here.
Member Church.
Here.
I keep having to stumble over your last name. I apologize. Member Nickel.
Here.
Member Richardson.
Here.
Co-Chair Hunter. Vice
Here.
Chair Hunter.
Here.
Chair Kraus.
Here. Vice Chair, what a great title, huh? Vice Chair.
Yeah,
Second
sure.
item is the consideration of the June 13th
The only vice chair in
meeting
town.
minutes. They have been distributed. Do I have
I have a correction.
Okay.
On page 2,
Yes.
about halfway down where it said that I asked if there are no variations, and then the next line said that Mr. Douglas said there are no variations. It's actually, I asked if there are variations, and he said there are variations. So if you take
That
those
is very important, yes.
two no's out of there.
Okay. Other suggestions, changes?
I will note parenthetically that this variation is before the Plan Commission next Wednesday, so stay tuned. But more importantly, the Village Board waived second reading and designated this property as a landmark back on Monday. So congratulations, you have your 25th landmark. Three
Hey.
along the way, but,
Hey.
yeah.
I just have one, the second paragraph on page 2. I don't think you really want that. I would take that out.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Would you?
It's an accurate statement, but yes.
It
we
is an
will.
accurate statement, but it doesn't really enhance the, any other? Yeah. Entertain a motion to approve with those amendments.
I so move.
Second.
Second.
Any additional discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Unanimously passes. Agenda item number 3 is public comment time. The Historic Preservation Commission provides an opportunity for anyone in the audience who wishes to discuss an issue that is within the purview of the commission and not on tonight's agenda. Anyone who would so wish, there is none. We were going to move agenda item 5 before agenda item number 4, but the petitioner for agenda item number 5 is not here, so we'll go back to the regular order. And agenda item number 4, which is an initial advisory review, proposed changes to exterior appearance at 548 East Scranton Avenue, which is a landmark property. Glenn, if you could give us a bit of background on that.
Sure, so just like it says, just like I went through last month, this is a landmark property, and so changes that would affect the exterior appearance of this property are subject to your advisory review. There is a whole set of standards you might potentially have to go through, but there's a threshold question first, which is if the proposed changes conform with the purpose, the goals of the Historic Preservation Commission. So if we do this initial review, you decide that it does match the purpose and the goals of historic preservation as we've defined them in the village, we stop there. If not, we enter into a process where there's a larger set of standards where we work to reach a mutually satisfactory conclusion, as we're going to do later tonight. So the applicants are here with us, as they've stated in their statement, as is presented there in the plans. They're looking to relocate a front door from a south to an east wall, to put in some matching siding, a window. There'll be a few other minor changes on the exterior of the house as well. Again, each of which is described there in the plans.
Before we ask the petitioners to make some comments or present, do we have any questions for clarity for Glenn? No? Petitioners, would you like to make a comment or statement? Please, at the microphone. Yeah.
We record these things for
Yeah,
posterity.
it's for the vast viewing audience, as I like to say.
Hello.
Hi. So if you could introduce yourself and.
Hi, I'm Maria McGuire.
Jeff McGuire.
I think our statement pretty much says what we're hoping to achieve. It's a very small house, and There was a window in that position previously. It's now covered just by a blank. It's not matching siding, it's just a blank in the wall. This is to help us live a little more easily in the house. As it is right now, we don't even use the front 2 rooms because it's completely cut off from the kitchen and the family room. We're hoping to open up that center wall and, you know, unfortunately, I don't want to say those words, open concept, but in this tiny bungalow or cottage, I think it'd be, make it much more livable. And then, so the issue is that the dining room table, where it is now, causes a really awkward swing around to the stairs from the kitchen.
So,
And that's because of the front door location, sorry.
right, and I understand. And just for clarification, just so we're all on the same page, so the historic preservation, so the landmark of the structure is the exterior. So what you do with the inside, you can do whatever you want with the inside.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
We understand that, you know, movement, especially of a door and a window, is a critical factor in usability of a property, but what we're concerned about are when this was landmarked, the entire exterior structure was landmarked. So everything, and I counted 5, others may have counted more, but I counted 5, just looking at the drawings, changes that you were suggesting to your structure. Just let me go through them,
Okay.
just to make sure. And for reference, I'm going, these aren't numbered, but I'm going to the, let's see, in our packet, it would be from the back, 1, 2, 4 from the back. And it's titled Maple Avenue Front Elevation East. We have that.
I can get it up on the projector.
Yeah, why don't you
Give me
do
a
that?
second, yeah.
And what I want to do is just, so that we're clear and identify each of the alterations that you're suggesting, and any motion that we would make would need to cover each of those. And now we're going to see our new technical acumen of the village is.
I will have to mention that I live just a few doors west of you on the other side of the street, and so I've walked past this house many, many times. And I've always wondered why there wasn't something there, or a door or a window, or wondered if there wasn't originally a door there.
You mean
You
where,
did.
where the blank is?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
It was where it was a window, right?
yeah.
It's what gave us the idea. We thought the door was there originally. Yeah.
So the east of it. Okay? Okay, so request number 1 is for, and it's the bubble on the left side, so a new wood door, and that's the place where there's now just a panel, correct?
Right, a blank,
Okay,
right.
so that, and access you're not proposing any change in the porch? Access would still be from the porch? So instead of coming up and turning
Making a hard right.
and making a hard right, you would come up and still make a hard right, but you'd have a left.
Yeah.
So the,
You could
so,
jog.
so your entrance would be moved from the north end, I'm sorry, from the south side to the east side.
Right, closer to the steps.
Okay, so that's number 1, and we can talk more about these when we get all 5 that I've identified. The next page is the opposite of that, that's number 2, that's taking the door away and putting in a window with simulated divided light galleries and seated glasses, that says leaded glass. So that's the second alteration, is taking the door away and putting in a window.
Correct.
Okay. And then the next 3 are on the next page, starting on the far right side. So there's a request to replace an existing window, there you go, Is that a different kind of window, or is it the same?
Smaller?
It's a smaller window, it's half the length. The stairs are actually taller than the window frame. I don't know what they did inside the house previously when they did this addition or remodeling, but the window doesn't fit with the stairs. The skirting panel goes in front of the window.
Okay. Number 4 is, I guess, the kitchen window, so tell me what you're doing with that window.
We're expanding it. Right now, it is about, I guess frame to frame, it's about 3 feet wide.
Okay,
Yeah, a little less probably.
Yeah, and double casement, and what we would like to do is just expand it. It's very dark in that part of the house because the windows aren't, there's not anything large or any window opposite that wall directly. The window actually faces the door.
So it's just expanding the size of the window.
expanding the size of the window, but essentially in the same place, just bigger,
Exactly.
Yes,
just
yes.
wider, right? Okay. And then the 5th is simply a decorative element, removing an elliptical window and replacing with a sunburst design. So those are there, did anybody else catch any others? Those were the 5 items that I had identified. Okay. So, commissioners, questions?
Yeah, I have one. The sunburst design, is that going to be a window, or is that just going to be a decorative?
There's a window there now. The other 2 windows next to it have shutters, and at one time, I think there might have been a shutter there. It doesn't exist now. It's very bright, and we just,
It's more about drywalling it on the inside, because we don't need the window.
Okay.
And whatever we can do, decorative or whatever, we're not gonna take that out. It's just we need to fill it in.
Okay, okay.
There was like you said, there was like a shutter in a picture, and we can't figure out what was up there. so.
Okay, okay.
When you say a shutter, you mean like a shade? That
Yeah, it
you
was
could-
like-
you could-
an
you could-
interior louvered shutter.
Yeah,
Okay.
it looked like it was like a wood shutter, and then when we bought the house, it wasn't there, so.
And if you're asking why we don't just replace that, part of it is that that is the only arched element in the house. It's not, it doesn't match anything else. That room is our master bedroom. The ceilings are very angular, sloped eaves. And not only that, there are 4 shuttered closet doors in there and more shutters on windows.
I think the thing is, it's just more to cover up the window. We do whatever we could outside to keep it looking the same.
Okay, and then on your south elevation picture, I'm just curious as to the window that you want to replace the existing front door with. I'm wondering why you don't put another double hung to match the one on the left side to make it sort of symmetric, somewhat symmetric across the front.
The small one on the right there.
Yes,
It's more about wall space
okay,
more than anything else.
go back
it-
one.
Yeah. Because that's going to be a dining area.
Where that
so-
one, Glenn,
Oh,
But I guess,
where the small window is?
Go
I mean,
forward.
I guess
Janie, which
after that.
sheet are you looking at?
Okay, I'm on,
Yeah, that one.
yeah, that,
So yeah, we're gonna put a
that
little,
window there. I'm just curious as to why it's not going to be a double hung to match the one on the opposite.
I think because that's what the architect suggested.
Is it at least the same width as the double hung on the other side?
you know, I have to say that this picture here, the double hung, is not correct.
Oh,
Or
isn't it?
it's not as far forward as you,
Let me-
sorry.
It's
You
not
go
on the front of the house. It is clear at the back of the porch into
Yeah,
the
it-
bathroom.
Oh, I see, I see. It's
not
it's
anywhere near the-
recessed.
it-
It's
on the
recessed.
setback.
It's 35 feet away from the front.
Okay, all right, yeah, that's deceiving.
It's definitely deceiving.
Yeah.
The one on the left.
But for those of us who walk by your house on a regular basis, what we're asking is a symmetry question. and,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
So,
Yeah, okay, I don't
Yeah, I don't know if you're going to be able to get a view that shows it because of that
Yeah, it's
tree.
right behind the tree.
Can you go to the other one that's on the east side? I'll try, maybe I can explain it.
You mean a photo, or?
No, right here, right here.
back.
The
Yeah.
window is way, as you can see the porch. it's
Right.
way to the left. Let's go down there.
Yes,
That's the
yes,
window.
yes. Yeah,
Ah.
I understand.
So the symmetry is about the way the T comes into the porch, I think.
Okay, okay.
And it is a higher window, because that's a powder room, it's a higher window than, for example, the windows that are facing the front. Those are low, they're about
Okay.
20 inches off the floor,
Off the floor,
and that one is this high,
okay. All right.
maybe, I don't know.
Were you asking Janie about the one that was facing the front or the one
The-
that's facing the east?
The double hung on the porch on the left-hand side is not actually on the front of the house. It's recessed quite a bit because the porch wraps around like a big U. So that window is not in the same plane as the double window. It's recessed back.
Yeah, the stem, certainly juts further out, but when you look at your home from the front, all three sets of windows are clearly visible. You can see the difference.
In the fall after the leaves have fallen, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if that's a powder room, that's an issue. You wouldn't necessarily want a big,
Yeah.
open, double-hung window.
Yeah. Well, I understand how difficult it is to take a cottage that was built in, 1885 or something to try and do things to make it the way you want it. You're not going to have it like it was
Well, that's part of the
done
joy
from
of
scratch.
having a cottage.
Exactly right.
And actu-
Quirks.
Actually, this is the minister's hotel, isn't it?
Is
If I-
it?
If I understand the history of this,
We
That-
never heard that part.
this is where the itinerant ministers who came to town would be put up. And so it's like a big house, but it had like an extra bedroom. And the traveling ministers, of course, who had they were all Methodists, and they had no money and whatnot, and they'd be put up for free, and then they preached for their supper. And so this is
that
always,
why-
Interesting.
This is-
Janet, when they mentioned how close it was in proximity to the tabernacle when they originally
yeah,
applied
it's,
for?
it's all part of the tabernacle community, yeah.
Well, actually, that property stopped at Center. So there really wasn't any Camp Meeting Association property north of Center. There were houses.
Yeah, lots of houses
Lots of
there.
houses,
Yeah,
but
it's a
there-
privately owned
Right.
house,
Oh,
and
okay.
they put the ministers up there.
Gotcha.
Okay, do we have other questions on the proposal? So what, we have a decision in front of us, and that decision is, since this is a landmark structure, we need to determine if this proposed work, the 5 items that we identified, is inconsistent with the historic preservation ordinance, or if it is not inconsistent with the historic preservation ordinance. So if we determine it is not inconsistent, then our responsibility would be concluded. We would make a motion that the village board, or that, I would suggest making a motion so that we memorialize the 5 changes that are proposed for this particular structure, but this would go no further, and the village staff would then determine whether or not to issue a building permit based on its normal protocol. If we determine that it is inconsistent with the provisions of the historic preservation ordinance, then we would hold an advisory review to discuss in more detail those 5 changes and come to an agreement as to what an appropriate change in this structure would be. So those are our 2, that's the path before us.
Glenn, I thought I heard you say we had already done that?
You did it last month in a different property.
Oh,
so
oh,
for
okay.
the
I'm
Center-
sorry, I
Center
didn't-
property, yeah.
Wasn't listening.
So the original landmarking that we did is in
Yeah.
this one, and there are 9 different reasons that we chose that, to consider it a landmark. And in reading through those, I don't find a challenge with the changes that are gonna be done.
I don't see anything here that's inconsistent with the nature of the house.
I think the most important thing is moving the door, because that's right on the front facade. That's the, you know, that's the money view of the house, both at east and south facades. And I don't think moving the door from one side to the other side of the porch is a terribly significant change to the structure of the house. So
Right.
I'm reasonably happy with that.
So I would entertain a motion that the Historic Preservation Commission has determined that the proposed work, the 5 changes which should be specified in this proposal, or in this motion, is not inconsistent with the purposes of the Historic Preservation Commission.
So moved.
I'll
Motion
second.
second. Any additional discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Yes, give me just one moment here.
Would you like me to talk? Tell me when to
No,
stop
that's all
talking.
right.
I can go in.
Member Bergman,
Yes.
Member Hunter,
Here, yes.
goodness, Member Church,
Yes.
Member Nickel, Member Richardson,
Yes.
Member Liebelt,
Yes.
Chair Kraus.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you very much for going through this process, and good luck on
Thank
what will
you.
be always an
Yes.
interesting process.
Thank you so much.
Good luck.
We love that house.
And you
Everybody.
may be interested in your, if you don't know, your home is on the next tour that will be in
Yes.
September. Oh, yeah.
In September, yeah.
Yeah. You can actually, if you want, you can be standing there and you can give the personal history of your house if you want.
Yeah, I actually met with Janet in the spring, and she didn't mention that.
We'll have to go back and tickle her memory lobes a little bit, because we had a fair discussion about that. I love the thought of itinerant ministers coming to town and having to preach for their supper. I mean, I think that's a, you know,
That is a great.
Good story.
That is a great dinner story, right?
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
okay.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 5 is an advisory review conference. So this is, we made a decision last month that there was a potential inconsistency with proposed changes to the accessory structure, the demolition of these accessory structure at 700 East Center. So this is an advisory review conference. We had approved the changes to the garage, if you recall, and we had requested more information around what would be replacing the accessory structures that were proposed for demolition. I think we had agreed in our conversation that they may have reached their useful life, and that we just needed to understand what was going to actually be replacing those structures. If you could tell us what is replacing those structures, we'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, my,
Oh, dear. She'll remember shortly.
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, can you see what this is in front of you or not?
We have these too.
You do?
We tried to make some
That one is
copies.
unbelievable, right? Okay, so what we've done here, I mean, I think where we left last, in addition to what Chairman Kraus said, is to come up, we didn't need final details, but we needed a better assimilation of what this would look like. And Paul was on our property last night, is relevant. You can speak to that. But
Yeah.
what you have in front of you are some examples of what it looks like existing today. I don't know, I think that's probably evident. Can you tell which ones are today?
Yeah.
So the shed, I guess the couple things I point to there are
I'm sorry, for our vast viewing audience again, could you speak into the microphone? Sorry.
Okay, so there's a couple things. One is this, you might notice that the structures are below ground. 2 of the 3 structures you have to step down into about 2 feet. And the bottom part, although is clearly old cement, on 2 of the structures, The upper part is not anything historically significant, and as you may remember from last time, we have continued water problems since I've last had the opportunity to be here. We've had another 2 feet in there.
Oh dear.
So in the village, did say they saw nothing in their routing down Center that would cause the problem, so from Center into my property is not their issue. We could combat that all we want, but ultimately, it's ours to figure out if we wanted to, and we'd have to throw thousands of dollars at that, which I don't know would cost any less than building new sheds. And really, those pipes have no other reason for being. We don't use water service on that side of the yard. And I hope nobody will be, and if they will, I guess they'll fix it someday, but we're not gonna sell that side of the property. So what we have intended is, and you're working that, Glenn? Is that, what I was gonna say is what we've intended, sorry, I'm drawn to the drawing, is, I'm trying to think of how to talk about this.
Why don't you talk about the placement on the lot? So the survey and the portion of the drawing that shows where it's going to be.
Yeah.
And then talk about what it is going to be.
Yeah.
How's that?
Absolutely. I'm trying to decide how to have you visualize. So if you're looking into our property from Center Avenue, you're staring at the greenhouse, and in what you have, you probably see like a 70s bit of a roof that has been added. The intent there, again, is to take that all off, to restore the wall straight across with its slate and original stucco scheme that would match the garage and the home. Then behind, you would envision that with all those sheds gone, there's also quite a bit on the west side of the sheds that's unusable right now. So with all those sheds gone, we would put a shed along the back, which would be the north wall of the home right now. Our neighbors have just a wood fence there, and our stucco, I'll call it a green shed, would be built approximately 25 feet plus or minus across the back, therefore hiding much of the wood that doesn't match anything architecturally either. The shed would be, in the drawing you have, would be stucco with a metal roof, which is in keeping with a number of roofs on our home. And it would have the double doors that would be the same style as our new garage doors, again, in kind of the French manor style. It will have copper gutters where needed. It'll be no more than 8.5 feet wide, therefore under a livable dwelling size. So unless I put my child in there or something, but that wouldn't be counted, and lock it. And yeah, so, and I guess the other thing for proportion-wise, whether that ends up 25 or 30 feet, it does not infringe upon the birch tree that exists, which also is short in what's left on its life per Canukin that I was asked to have come out. But additionally, the square footage of what we have today in storage is about twice what we will be putting in, as far as just structural buildings. And therefore, we'll have a lot of green space between the wall and the shed, both for, planting a garden and putting more boxwood, which is more my style, because you don't have to maintain it, but that's what the thought is. So I think we accomplished the objective in giving you a very close approximation of what this would look like. Paul, anything you would like to add, having been on the property?
Well, I went over to the house last night to take a look at the buildings. Last month, Christine had said that there's a lot of concrete in those buildings. And when I thought of the ramp going down into the buildings, it reminded me of some of the structures that my dad's firm has built for various horse farms and stables with regards to dairy buildings. And so they built quite a few dairy barns with milking parlors, manure pits, and all sorts of sort of industrial things like that. And it seemed to me, looking at the walls on these buildings, the walls are concrete out of the ground by 36, maybe 40 inches, which leads me to think that they are more in the way of industrial buildings than they are of just being, garden sheds. So I went over, Christine was very nice, we had a nice conversation. They're just sheds. If it was a dairy barn with a milking parlor in it, there's no evidence of any of that left. The greenhouse part of it, which is the part furthest south, has the newest concrete, that's poured concrete into plywood forms, so we know that it's poured probably sometime in the 1960s or so. The other buildings were set with plank forms, so we know that that concrete was poured before the 1930s, before plywood was available. So that's all very old concrete, probably predating when Christine's house turned into a Jerry Cerny-style house. So they're very old buildings, but they've had all brand-new superstructures built on top of them. And Christine is absolutely right when she talks about not very attractive 1970s architecture. I hesitate to call it architecture, but there's some really terrible windows in there. And other pieces of structure in there. It's just sort of a mishmash of stuff. And I have having seen it now, I have no qualms about saying goodbye to the sheds.
Well, thank you, that makes me feel
Yeah.
better.
Well, I know one issue in Lake Bluff also is permeable ground, and for you to remove those buildings will give you more permeable ground if you're going to just put garden and, you know, so that might mitigate some of your,
Yeah, I sure think it
Have
will.
other
I had
issues.
Aero Plumbing come out just to rod and, spend a couple thousand, just so I felt like at least I tried to solve the water problem before I knocked it down. And I also wasn't, unfairly of me, I should say, non-informed, I kept saying to Jim Leduc, so just capping it, where's the water gonna go? I don't get that, like, if we just cap it. That said, the plumbers came out and spent the day and tried to rod and ran into some things and said, you might just want to tear this down and cap it. I'm like, oh, okay, Jim, I'm super sorry, I've been questioning you. So anyways, yeah, it was pretty consistent. And they did say, you could spend another few thousand and we could go from where it stops to where it goes. Doesn't mean we can fix it, it might be way out in the middle of the street. Okay. So I guess my request for demoing and building, rebuilding the wall and adding a new garden shed in keeping with the home is what I'm requesting, please.
Any additional questions or comments?
I just have one question that I don't understand. I mean, I like what you're doing, but if I look at the elevation of the front, of the doors, and then I look at the two sides, it's a shed roof, and you say it's got a metal standing seam roof, and it looks to me like the seams are running the wrong direction.
Yes.
So from
In the drawing?
in the drawing.
Okay.
So from the front,
Yeah.
the long view, you'll see these vertical standing
see.
seams
I see what
every
you're saying.
18 inches or so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So other than that, I think it's great.
Well, you make a good point, Robert, and we absolutely shouldn't do it with that drawing, but it's intended to be directional, and Jim will make sure it all
Yeah,
goes in the
and-
proper way.
Yeah,
You can just build the building on a tilt.
yeah, just,
Yeah, there you go.
maybe that's next.
Yeah.
We were also asked to look at, and it is in the packet, it's pages 3 and 4, criteria for advisory review, section 9-14-6. The general standards and the design standards, I didn't see anything in there that this proposal would be contrary with. So, given the discussion, I would entertain a motion that the Historic Preservation Commission finds that the proposed demolition of the existing accessory structures and the proposed addition of the new structure are not inconsistent with the purpose and goals of the Historic Preservation Ordinance. And that the advisory review be concluded.
I so move.
Second?
Second.
Additional discussion? Roll call.
Good.
Sure. Member Leebold?
Randy?
Leebold.
Yep.
Member Richardson?
Yes.
Member Nickel?
Yes.
Member Church?
Yes.
Co-Chair Hunter? Vice Chair Hunter?
Just say Hunter.
Hunter?
Yes.
Yes.
Member Bergman?
Here, present.
And
Yes,
passes
thank you.
Good luck on your
Yeah.
on your
Thank you
project.
very much. It made it
Thank
worthwhile
you.
working with you guys, Nate.
Good luck.
Good luck.
Commission has its own thing I'm calling last year.
Just a point of clarification, Glenn, will this, this proposal effectively strips, this new structure will not be part of the landmark status of the property?
That is a more confusing question than you think, but yes, that
Okay.
would be my
That's the intent, so the minutes
Would
should
think
reflect
that
the
would be the
intent that the
case,
new
yeah.
structure would not be part of the landmarking.
Right.
Actually, I'm surprised that the old structures were.
So am I, but we did it, so I didn't say anything.
I know.
We should have suggested a tear down then.
Okay.
You know, that reminds me of one other thing, too. I was thinking about the house on 548 Scranton. Are they going to have to change their address to Maple if their front door faces? Because I know there are other houses that have done that, you know, that
I don't think they can.
front door facing on someplace other than what their address says.
At times we give people a choice, but as far as most of the code is concerned, the front of your lot is the shortest side of the lot facing the street.
Ah, okay,
So that's-
Interesting. I
that's
didn't know
The rule
that.
we try to follow.
okay.
Okay, agenda item number 6, strategic planning. I would first, one of the things we did last month, as reflected a little bit in our minutes, was report out on the homework that I'd given the month before. And if you remember, the homework was talk to folks in the community about preservation, and just to get a sense and to get more, just more pieces of opinion. So we did chat with that, but I wanted to give Bob and Randolph a chance to comment on anyone they might have had a chance to talk to about historic preservation.
Well, I talked to my next door neighbor.
Okay.
We used to be Randy's next door neighbor.
Who's, oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Thanks for both of you.
And, you know, they love the town. They were familiar with the town because his parents live in Lake Forest, and so they were looking for something they could afford, and they like all the activities, and they got 2 little kids, and they're planning on, you know, staying there. So they're using everything in town, and that's what's cool. Some other people that are going to be moving to town, that are going to be, actually, they're the ones that are building the house on Moffett and Prospect. And I met her the other day, and it's an interesting concept of what they're doing, but they're enamored with town. They're moving out of Prairie Crossing. And it's just a totally different, she calls it the place of weeds out there. And if anybody's been out to Prairie Crossing, it's a natural landscape area in Grays Lake. And they're very excited about coming to town. We tried to get a hold of her later, and this is on the 4th of July, and I couldn't. She said, oh, I'm sorry, I was at the beach. So, you know, they're into it, and they're not, they haven't even built the house yet.
Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more, because those are really two of the, what I've been calling the opportunities to influence decisions on buying property in the village, and we'll talk more, but that's good. Any others you've talked to? Or?
I don't remember.
Okay.
It was
Randy?
2 or 3 months
No?
ago.
No.
Okay. So based on the discussion that we've had now for a couple of, I had a couple of meetings, I took a stab at what I called choosing Lake Bluff as a destination, and it is, let me summarize it again, and then I sort of want to go through this. This is an offshoot of what the HPC had done a while ago that resulted in, if I can quickly find it, in a document to the Lake Bluff Village Board, which I think was, I don't know when this was. But it was, this was in Janet's information she gave to me, but in,
Right. Yeah, this was presented for discussion back around your meeting October of last year, perhaps, give or
Okay.
take, maybe even a little bit earlier. That document itself wasn't transmitted to the village board, that wasn't your recommendations, but that's something Janet wrote up and shared with this group.
Okay. So the idea here is to create a discussion document that we can share, certainly with the village board, but also with the residents of the village, on choosing Lake Bluff as a destination. And what I've tried to do is, and what I did in my discussions with folks, is to try to talk about the village and the historic preservation without using either of those two words, without using historic and without using preservation. Since they have a certain, to some folks, they have a certain presupposition as to what is meant that so I just tried to avoid them. So as I say in the introduction of this document, hopefully we can define those two terms in a way that is reflective of the current village, that we'll know what historic preservation is after we go through the process. So after trying to take all of the information that the commission has done in the last year or two and that we've done over the last couple of months, I've focused on 3 opportunities for intervention. So what can the village do when property owners or potential property owners are thinking about Lake Bluff and thinking about building or buying in Lake Bluff? So the first of those, and I'm missing a quote mark here, but the first intervention opportunity is I'm thinking of buying a home. And the subtitle is there, how do we encourage investment in Lake Bluff? This is, we have some of this in the village. We don't have much of it. Actually, the strategic document, the update on the strategic plan is a component of it. If you look at, Paul was nice enough when he was out in Aurora to get some documents. I'll pass these around, but this is all from Aurora. Frequently asked questions about historic districts, Aurora downtown, eat, drink, and play, Civil War and architecture in Aurora, building Aurora, the Sears houses in Aurora, and then an architectural portrait of Aurora. These are all brochures and information that are designed to do just this, is to encourage investment in Aurora. So what can we do as the village of Lake Bluff to encourage investment in Lake Bluff? So these are people who really, they may know Lake Bluff, they may not know Lake Bluff, but they're thinking about buying a house, and we want them to think about Lake Bluff. What happened to the fluorescent? Who's got fluorescent?
Here it is.
So there's another, I was in Colorado, in a tiny little town called Florissant, Colorado, that is just Highway 24 going east-west, and then a junction where you turn off to go to Cripple Creek, actually, if you're familiar with up there. And much to my surprise, they have a historic, they have a museum, they have a historic preservation not-for-profit, and they have this little one-page handout that identifies 14 Florissant historic tour and map. So that's another, and there are lots of ideas here. But, so some of the things that, and if my intent is not just to put a document together that says here's some good things to do, but actually put an action plan together and assign responsibilities as to who within the village is going to actually do this stuff. Yeah, that's always been a challenge for us. So I've put this into 2 pieces, and there's a lot of mores here because, I want to discuss this with the group. But the first is really a background. It's kind of defining Lake Bluff as a place to live. It's some of that Aurora stuff. So it's in whatever format we feel comfortable, the village feels comfortable, but talking about attributes, amenities, the housing market, the demographics, the educational environment, which is why a lot of people with, people with young kids always talk about the opportunity for a great education for their kids. The natural environment, as people come to know the village, they talk about the open space. And more than half of the village is open space. We've got lots of good information about that I think we need to get out to the community. The amenity is too busy because they're using the lake, or they're coming downtown, or they're using things. access, which is, you know, you can get downtown pretty quickly, and a lot of people do that often, so the attractions of a big metropolitan area are there. And then more, but it's putting it all in a package and talking about Lake Bluff as a place to live. The second I've called Lake Bluff Past, Present, and Future. So the current environment, which is our vision, and that's really, you know, elements of the strategic vision that we have in front of us. We had talked at our last meeting and the meeting before about wanting to attract families. I think we all came to Lake Bluff with, you know, with the intention, or many of us did, of raising families here. And if that's the demographic that we're looking to attract, we can create information that will appeal to that demographic when they're ready to think, when they're saying, it's time, I'm gonna buy a house. You know, I can't live in the city anymore, you know, the schools, whatever those things are. The family focus, the economic climate.
Thank you.
And then some things about Lake Bluff's past, which is in a lot of the Aurora. So some of the themes, some of the history of the community itself. So we know about the camp meeting grounds. There's an interesting history of railroads. This is really a suburban development. We'll talk in a minute about the completion of the historic survey that is really the post-World War II suburbanization of Lake Bluff is a lot of what we'll be identifying. There are a lot of neighborhoods. You've done some work as a group here that Janet shared with me that you call them historic areas, but it's this map that this group had identified. There's a lot more than this. There's a lot more little subgroups. I was learning that what's the Indian Hill, is that the little cul-de-sac off of Sheridan Road? But that was a farm, and it actually was a working farm so there's a history of that space.
A little gentleman's farm.
Yeah, there's a number of homes on the north side of Sheridan Road as it goes east and west that were built at the same time, and those haven't, I've forgotten it, but those have a name.
The Hanson and Warehane houses.
Okay, so there's a lot of community subsets that we need to identify, and so think about not a totally different scale, but when you go in, when you live in Chicago, when I was growing up, although I didn't grow up in Chicago, my wife did, and she said that when people ask where you lived, you identified, you know, which parish you were in, if you were of that particular faith. When you live in Chicago now, it's not the intersection, it's the neighborhood. It's I live in Ravenswood, or I live in Wicker Park, or I live in Bucktown. And those boundaries change based on, you know, to some degree, the whims of the real estate market. We have those kinds of neighborhoods here. We don't need to do any landmarking or certification or even create historic districts to call them neighborhoods and to identify them and to categorize the homes that are there as part of a neighborhood. We can do that. The village can certainly do that if the village would so want. And then we probably want to, you know, the culmination of past, present, and future is obviously the future, but we need to think a little bit about what that would look like. So that's the first intervention. I'm thinking of buying a home. You may know about Lake Bluff. You may not know about Lake Bluff. Here's things that the village can put together, can do, that for that person at that moment, when they're thinking of buying a home, the kinds of people that we want to encourage to move into Lake Bluff, we can have information ready for them. So that's kind of the first. The second intervention is what I call I want in. I want to live in Lake Bluff. I want to be here. I like this place. You've convinced me I want to be here. So I've also divided this into a couple of sections. The first is explore, and I've created my Lake Bluff. Some of it are written resources, some of which we have, a lot of which we don't, but it's the basics. So how big is the village? What schools do we have here? Where do your kids go to high school? What are the preschools that are available? The parks and recreation, what kind of amenities do we have here? What kind of amenities are close by? I don't know if we want to talk about the real estate environment that starts getting a little bit out of field, but You know, there are different economic markets in this village. There's an east of the track, there's a Green Bay Road corridor, there's, you know, a west of 41 corridor. So there are different real estate environments, if we want to get that far, and talk about the financial commitment necessary in the village. There's a sense of community. Lots of people talk about that. Lots of the people I talk to identified it as when you're here, you learn that there's a lot of stuff to do. There's an opportunity for lots of things, lots of involvement, depending on where you are in your life. I think we need to memorialize that so that when people are thinking about Lake Bluff, they understand not just the 4th of July and the Criterion and the, you know, the lighting of the green, but the social clubs, the youth groups, the organizations, all the things that are here that are part of the fabric of the village that would be of interest to people at certain points in their life. Certainly the history, and a lot of this, some of this is written. The social history of Lake Bluff is certainly written, but it's only the social history. There's a lot of other history that we could enhance or could encourage. There's, as I said, there's a whole history of railroad and the influence of the railroads on Lake Bluff that would be really interesting. One of the suburban development is a whole interesting subset. So there's things that we could do to actually talk about history. There's a governance aspect, and governance there has a couple of meanings to me. It has, you know, we are a well-run town. We have a town that is thankfully not in financial crisis. We have a town that has more than adequate services, fire, police. We are upgrading our infrastructure, all the things that we're doing as part of government. There's also governance in terms of all the commissions and opportunities for involvement and learning more. We had talked about Lake Bluff Online, and this is using the, we previewed it. Did you have a chance, Bob, to look at that? The Evanston Historic District stuff? Okay. And did you have a chance, Randy, to look at that? The Evanston Historic District?
No.
Can you pull that up? Yeah. But the intent is to do that here, is to do so that individuals online, bless you, can look at Lake Bluff in a really a very interesting way. And I'm suggesting, now, we have to create the information that goes into the template and the links that go into the template. Okay, so this is just a refresher. That's the district. So zoom in. Let Randy pick a property. So this is just south of Northwestern. So zoom in some more. Zoom in some more.
You can drive yourself nuts. This becomes addictive.
It does. Okay, so what property do you want to look at? Pick one.
Just go ahead and
Pick a
pick one.
property.
Just go ahead and
Pick a
pick one.
number.
Don't-
That one.
Which one?
Yeah, just pick
That
one.
one? There you go. Okay, then expand it, zoom in, or no, PDF data sheet.
I know someone who bought a house right
Okay.
across the street.
So, really?
Yeah.
So this is available for every property in the historic district in Evanston, and it is addictive. It is very addictive.
I kept, because I used to work right there, and I said, oh,
What's-
this
yeah.
is not, yeah.
And we need to do this for Lake Bluff. And we need, I think that's one of this is the backbone, I think, of a lot of the information that we're trying to pull together. We'll have it in one place. It's gonna be a bear to pull it together.
Well, with the historic surveys that we have completed, and the one we're about to have completed, we're about to have 90% coverage of a data sheet like that.
We'll have a data sheet, but the way I envision this is there's a heck of a lot more.
Oh, sure.
One of
You gotta start at the beginning.
Yeah, and so we'll have the beginning, we'll have
So-
most of the properties individually identified with some basic information. So you're right, we'll be starting from a good point, but we'll need to identify the neighborhoods. Is this in a neighborhood, and how do we identify that? My house, for example, was the stable for the two houses that are north of me. And that needs to be in for all three of those houses. That was once a compound. So that, you know, that's the kind of detail that's gonna take a long time for us to put together. But that's what I mean is the basic format. So if you go back to the map, the base map, if you go back to the base map magically, okay, and get rid of the detail, and then zoom out. Okay, so there's no reason that we can't create a series of overlays. So where are the schools? So you can click on a button and the schools will be identified, the parks will be identified, the open space will be identified, the neighborhoods that we identify. If you want to know neighborhoods, you'll get the 15 neighborhoods we've identified, each separately identified, that under that filter you could go in and get a brief history of what the neighborhood really is or why it was there. We could put in something that would show the retail environment within Lake Bluff. So the businesses, so you show here's the downtown, here's the 41 corridor. You could actually create the templates so that, and maybe you're working with the Chamber of Commerce, you could get information about each individual business and what their hours of operation are and their website links and all of that information that would be there. Certainly notable homes are structured, our landmark homes, the properties on the National Register could be there. The properties that we might want to identify as significant because of the survey that haven't gone through landmarking. All of that could be an overlay as part of this basic map. So I think this is a really critical piece of putting our historic, I used the word I didn't want to use, but putting our historic infrastructure, if you would, in place in an online backbone. So this is the backbone of the communication. You can also have on that individual template, you can have links. So you can link, and Bob, if you really want to get hung up on stuff, use the Lake Bluff version of this district, which exists. And actually, I think you also have the Lake County one. If you go to the Lake County one, you can actually look at every individual parcel and find out what the appraised value is, what the taxes were paid for the last 10 years, and what the last recorded sales prices were, if anybody's interested.
Yeah.
But you can do that parcel by parcel.
Zillow's got a similar thing.
Well, and
Just,
one of my kids is looking at it.
it's accuracy is
Accuracy problems.
plus or minus
But it's,
25%.
this is pretty much available all over the country, so one of my kids was looking, is gonna do a housing change, and I was just putzing around, and I went to their county, and it said, give me a base map, and I went to a base map, and I went, holy crap, there it is. So I started looking at individual parcels, and it's not quite as robust as Lake County. This is in New York, but. So that's the kind of stuff, and there can be lots of links to the county information, links to the Lake Bluff History Museum, so that there can be a data exchange between the two, between the Lake Forest, Lake Bluff Historical Society, and more links that we have. But I look at this as the backbone, the data repository, the online repository of information with a lot of with the information that we have in the village, in the Lake Bluff History Museum, with the Lake Forest, Lake Bluff Historical Society, and some others that we accumulate. We have a place to put it, which is a good thing. So that's one part of I want in. The second part, which I've subtitled, I found the perfect place. I want this, I really want to know about this house. Well, then there's a whole nother level of detail. And Paul, that's what you were getting to in talking about what that house was, who was there, and they were fascinated by it. So this whole level of detail that you would get to through this tool, that you would be able to go into and you'd find out about your property. I envision a property dossier that would be attached to your sales information that the real estate community would give you. It would give a link to this, but it could also potentially give information about your property to people who are thinking about buying a home. The concept is, if you know this is a structure that has significance to the village, you may be attracted to that structure simply because of the significance, or you may recognize that significant alterations to that structure would have ramifications to the environment and the community where that structure resides. So it's data, it's information. And then similar to what happens in Lake Forest, we could, I call it development on Lake Bluff, but there could be attached to the sales contract, as you have in Lake Forest, the rules around how you, additions, zoning, demolitions. So the process and protocol when you want to make changes to that structure. So that, I found the perfect place, but And then, two paths. I'm interested in rehabilitation and I'm interested in new construction. And here, up until this point, I don't think much of this is controversial, although I'm often surprised. But I think this is education, pure and simple. This is, providing education in a consistent format for people who are interested in it. These two become policy statements that we'll need to flesh out a lot more, so I've just put a few thoughts here. But if you're interested in rehabilitation, wouldn't it be nice if there were incentives to rehabilitate your property? We have incentives now. If you landmark your property, there's a tax freeze for however many years those are, and all of that goes on. But couldn't we do more? Couldn't the village say that, as a policy, that the village will waive building fees?
Don't we already waive fees?
No.
They're reduced.
They're reduced, okay.
25% for a landmark, 50% for certified, which we don't
Yeah,
have anymore.
okay, so we're at least partway there.
Yeah, so there could be a complete waiver. So in effect, you could say, and I realize this has financial implication for the village and obviously more discussion, but you could say that if you decide to live in Lake Bluff, rehab your home, we don't want to have any don't want you to pay additional fees. The village also could, if it wanted, freeze the village's portion of property taxes for X number of years, so that there'd be no increase in the village component, which is only 13%.
Not even. 7% is ours, 6% is the park district, so we use 13 compared to
So I had that right.
one particular southern.
How much longer do you want than the 12 years it's available,
For,
property tax freeze?
but that's only if you're landmarking.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Well,
but
not
do
just
it.
any landmark, that's the,
Right, it has to be the
Big
sort of,
landmark.
it has to be that, but just say, no, if you're gonna rehab your home, the village will freeze you don't have to go through the national.
this isn't national, this is local landmarking, and you can then get the.
You don't
tax
have to
freeze.
go, you don't have to landmark, is what this is suggesting. Yes, there are a lot there, and remember, this is just some thoughts.
Okay.
And then zoning, and subject to a lot of discussion, and then zoning flexibility, those of us that have been involved in zoning. It
Absolutely.
would be easier to make alterations if you're going to rehabilitate an existing structure. One of the challenges to everyone, I was looking at Paul, one of the challenges here, you want to do, I think we all would like to see some of this for, the handful and, hands and toes of houses that we don't want to lose in the village. And for a lot of others that are in the context, they enhance the context, the sense of place in the village. But how do you draw a line there? And that's what landmarking has done, is it's drawn a line. Or do you simply say that we encourage rehabilitation of any structure? Or do you have some other line? How do you do that is really a question. And then the third one here is, and again, this is a bit, I don't know how we would pull this off, but there are architects and builders that work in the village that are comfortable with rehabilitation and understand the context of the village. Can they somehow be identified? Which would mean that others wouldn't be. Is that about the politest way to say it? So that's one part of it. So we've gone from, I'm thinking about a house and we want to encourage people to think about Lake Bluff. We've gone to, I want Lake Bluff, so here's a whole bunch of information about where you live, about where you want to live, about the village, about the individual neighborhood, about your individual property, and then a decision, I want to rehab, so here's some things that the village can do. And then, no, I really want new construction, so then folks need to understand what the protocol is, hopefully before they purchase the house, that they understand what the protocol is to actually do that within the village. And that's the third intervention opportunity, then the big one. I want to build a new home in Lake Bluff. Since there's not a lot of vacant lots left in the village, there still are a few. This would probably be tear down and then new construction. So how do we want to deal with that? So I put a couple, and again, these are beginnings of discussion. So what are the village ordinances, and is the village comfortable in in communicating to a potential buyer in Lake Bluff who wants to tear down a house, that there will be strict application of village ordinances, so that it will be much harder to get variances if you want to tear down and build new. The second item here is things that I know the ABR has talked about, and that's on a building code amendment side, is defining or more robustly defining materials that are appropriate in the building of homes. And that is, I know, at the ABR level, Bob, you can comment on that, but also at other levels, is more controversial. Jump in there for a second.
Well, I sent everybody a list
Yeah.
of 9 items after, you should have all gotten one.
Sure, so it's, it didn't make it into your packet, but it's here at the dais for you. It looks like this right here. So please,
Okay.
take it on out, take a look.
After
This thing?
a great deal of discussion, I mean, we're talking months, we filtered it down. Decided we did not want to have design criteria. That's wrong, in ABR's opinion. What we wanted to do is try and develop some qualitative criteria. And they became fairly straightforward as we, they started with about 30 of them. We kept filtering them down, got to this, the last 9. And that's where it's left off. I presented this to the village board about, I don't know,
February.
February. He had some questions that would, in my opinion, were watering it down, and so we haven't done anything with it. And nobody's asked us to.
From what just to chime in, from what I recall from the village board discussion, I think the biggest theme was this idea of, think about neighborhoods like the Sanctuary or other places in town. You could read these standards, and what exists there today, how it was built, perhaps might not meet them today. The counter argument to that, of course, is that this is choosing to send this through this type of review is a discretionary choice, the way it's set up. So we have a provision called similar, dissimilar housing, or if the building commissioner sees a house that looks wildly out of sorts, they can send it to the ABR for a review. This is set up in a similar way. I think it's fair to say that some of the board members' concerns were that, even with that context in mind, that, a staff member would have the choice to send it, that not necessarily every house would have to go through this. That
Oh,
was
yeah,
still
that's
some-
right.
I think that was the biggest concern from my recollection. I don't know, I don't remember.
Although
any
the way
others.
this is written, it says that the village building regulations be amended to require new construction of single and multifamily residence to comply with the following 9 requirements.
That's right.
Okay, and I think that's where we need to start. So, I think the memo that we jointly, that I happen to draft, but we all put together, puts this in context, I think, in a way that I think is important to the discussion. It sort of hangs in place. The next piece, go ahead.
Clarification, is the village board still considering whether they're going to adopt this?
I don't know.
Recommendations? I don't know who's.
It's been presented to them, they haven't acted on it. So I think if we are, and I'm not asking for that today, but if we're comfortable with something like this, I think we put it into the bigger context of what we're discussing. The one right after that is the next level, and I struggled to try to find the right words, so I just said suggestions on context. So and so you could, and a lot of communities do, they have a design review. But I'm deliberately not using those terms because I think a mandatory design review doesn't work in the village of Lake Bluff, just like districts haven't worked, and for a whole variety of reasons. But the context of a new structure in Lake Bluff, in terms of how does it fit in the neighborhood, what are setbacks and height, what's the relationship to the streetscape, and we want to make sure that we don't preclude I would love to see more modern architecture in Lake Bluff. I think appropriately scaled and massing and placed on I would love to see that. So we don't want to preclude that. This is not, this shouldn't be a Victorian village, and that's all you can build. There should be opportunities for lots of things that are in the context of the village itself. So I know we'll need a lot of discussion on that, and that is potentially controversial. And then again, local architects and builders that are familiar with Lake Bluff that understand this stuff intuitively as they're designing homes. So that's my attempt at trying to summarize what we've talked about for the last couple of
This
months.
shouldn't take too long to do.
We have it done by the end of the year?
You're thinking next week?
I'm just curious about the local architects and buildings familiar with Lake Bluff, because can any village body actually make a recommendation like that without?
I don't know.
Could be some lawsuits on the part of somebody who wants to build here who.
This came from two of the people I talked to, the two people who actually, one did a major renovation, one tore down a house and built a new one, and both of them said, I didn't know I didn't have an architect, I didn't have a builder. So I had to sort of figure out, and use people from out of town in one situation. And both of those people, one much more strongly than the other, said, I would have still built a new house, but I would have built something different.
Well, I'm not.
And that's where this
Yeah,
comes
yeah,
from.
I understand, I understand that. I'm just thinking that if a body of Lake Bluff official government were to give out a list like that, I would think that that would be
Yeah, that would
somewhat
be a problem from the architectural
problematic.
standpoint.
Yeah, it would, it would.
But
So,
the way people should do it is they drive around a town and they say, I like that one, I like that one, I like that one. Who did it?
And go knock on doors, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Or it's listed in that pop-up
and, well, yeah,
There you
but
go.
right now we don't have the
design.
pop-up.
Right.
But, I mean, you
so
can.
let's hold that, that's a
Yeah.
great thought, that the architect and the builder and the year would be a good thing to put in the pop-up.
A
That,
corollary that runs
I like
with
that.
that
I like that a lot.
is the tear downs that we've seen come in front of us, that these national building companies are driving. And you'll have a builder show up who says, I work for a publicly traded New York Stock Exchange building company, and we kind of don't give a hoot what we build. It's just that we bought a lot in your town, we're gonna tear it down, and we're gonna extract our $200,000 out of you. And I have selected this plan out of my plan book, okay? And that is a very detrimental thing, because here's a person who not only doesn't know anything about the village, he doesn't care about the village, and he's not gonna be here 10 seconds after he gets his check. So I think
Paul, exactly what you're
I
saying
think
is what
exploring
drove.
exploring this
what drove
list
this to
concept,
do.
yeah, exploring this concept is something very important, so that you can tell that builder, no, you have to slow down, you have to put the book away, you have to drive around town, find something that, is either reminiscent in your book or available from an architect who can get you a set of local plans. I mean, some of the things.
This will help guide
Yeah,
that.
I mean,
'cause-
we desperately need to go to the people who have absolutely no vested interest in the village, other than the fact that it's a financial arbitrage. And those are the people that I think cause the most damage.
Well, there are probably different groups of
microphone down, so it's.
different folks who buy homes and tear them down. There are the builders who look for empty lots and then want to build, but there are also some people who want to move into the town and have a new home, or perhaps some people who have lived here for a while and
Sure.
have grown their home, but they don't
Sure.
want to leave, so then they, so I think all of this information is exciting, and I love the idea of creating this to market to people, but I do think we'll have to tweak it some too for these different categories of folks, whether it's developers or first-time buyers.
I want to hear Bob Hunter's standards for kicking somebody off the list. So after we put the list together, Bob gets to put together the standards and say, buddy, you're off the list.
There have been some, I'm sort of the ad hoc developer design review guy that, and I haven't looked at anything for quite a while. But there's been some that I get violently opposed to and say this guy should never be allowed to practice
Yeah.
and start,
Yes.
do this.
Certainly.
Well, oh, go ahead.
Just want, we had talked just in the last meeting before about trying to gather some information about the number of tear downs in the last 5 to 8 or 10 years and get some idea of who did those. Were they developers or were they first-time buyers coming into the village? So we have a little bit about information about our target audience.
I think it's a moving target. Some of the national companies that Paul is talking about seem to have decided to do something else, at least for now. You know, we've looked at a number of tear downs ourselves that, not all of them are appropriate, but I think the ones that we've allowed to go ahead are better for it. And there we know what's going, and we know who the architect is, we know what they're gonna do. And they've come in here and showed us. So I'm not sure that the individuals that wanna come in and tear something down, that's a different ballgame. But everybody has to follow the same criteria, whoever they are.
That's true, because I specifically asked if we could make new rules for outside builders,
We talked about that.
and I was told no.
Probably not.
Part of what I'd suggest to you on this topic, and we've kind of touched on the subject in the last year, you know, when we talk about, as Paul so eloquently put it, people coming in to extract $200,000 and leave, that relies on a precondition, which essentially is that there's a house in such disrepair or such of a mismatch to the market or so on or so on or so on, that it's economical for them to buy it and tear it down and build something new and get $200,000 out of the deal by the time all's said and done. You know, between us, this commission landmarking a house or whatever the start is and the end of a demolition review or a new design review or something like that, a lot of time goes by where we have really no involvement in the process. You have a soft incentive of saying, here's your 25% off a building permit. But, you know, at the point where some of these things are coming forward and they have asbestos or they have mold or they've fallen in such disrepair, demolition by neglect, if you would, it's going to be really hard to keep someone from coming in and trying to turn a buck because there's a buck to be made. Could you build up a strong enough infrastructure of design review, I mean, let's just call it hurdles, to discourage those people at that moment? You could. That has consequences too.
But that's not gonna fly, that's not gonna fly.
And that doesn't benefit the village either.
That's
One
just
of the
not gonna
things that we've tried to set up is that, you know, in the past, somebody comes in, they want to build something, whether it's a tear down, whether it's an out of town, and they come in, they've got a complete set of documents. Okay, that's 80% of an architect's fee that they've spent. And that's a substantial amount of money. So you're sitting on a board and saying, I think you should change this and change that. Okay, now that guy's meter starts going. And besides that, time is money. So what we try to institute is that they come in on a preliminary basis. You know, every architect starts off with a sketch or a drawing or a computer thing that's just, here's an idea of what we want to do. And that comes in and goes to Mike, and he looks at it and says, okay, this is not going to fly with the ABR. It doesn't meet these 9 criteria. Now you got to go see them. So that's the theory of what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
And it's not a formalized, you must do everything. You know, we're not going to look at everything that comes in the door as long as it's fine.
And the local architects and the local builders learn that very quickly. They talk amongst themselves, and that information gets passed around so that the local guys coming in are gonna be,
If they want to do good work,
Yeah.
because they are local.
yeah,
that's where
and they're
they-
gonna be in the ballpark. So-
That's where they are.
But more importantly, let me change the subject back. I want to go back to this this thing, because I think this is step one. The architect's list, that's kind of hanging out there, and that'll come along as it comes along. How do we get the manpower, dollar power to start building this? Is there software that we can buy? Is there software we have to develop? Did Evanston Historical Commission buy that from Computers R Us? And where do we start digging into figuring out how to make this thing work, that you can add on
So,
endless pages of information as you learn more about each house and the old pictures get unearthed and all of that? How do we build that?
the base maps exist. So that the count, those are existing by county. I mean, we put up Lick Bluff because we have Lick Bluff.
Well, I can do you one better than that if you like.
Okay.
There's a little bit of a segue. So we're jumping ahead a little bit to the grand unveiling. It's not that grand of an unveiling. We're getting into an exhibit we've made for some surveying we're engaging Benjamin Historic to make. But just to put it into context here, so when we get to our survey discussion, we'll talk about the blue and the red and the purple. These are all areas that aren't surveyed for various reasons. The green dots with a few interruptions are properties that have been surveyed by BHC or one of its predecessor groups in the past. At one time, you might recall, I think when the original survey was done, what are now two separate firms, one firm, yada, yada.
So just zoom in on a house. So the point is that the base exists, so this is already in existence. What we have to do is create the template. What exists now is just some information about ownership, lot size. There's not a lot there, but we need to develop a template. Somewhere, Paul, there needs to be a template that's developed.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah,
you.
and then
Do we build or buy?
I think we build the template. That's not that hard. I mean, we have a lot of, so the stuff that's in the historic surveys is in a template form. We have a number of communities that have templates that are available. Designing and building a template it's time consuming, but it's not that hard. The hard part is actually loading the information into that template, and that's gonna be a years-long effort.
The Lake County Assessor's Office information, that's public information,
That's
right?
public
So we
information.
could use all of that, too?
We could if we wanted to, yeah, can you go to the Lake County maps? Sure. See what's there. So the point is, the hard part, it isn't a computer access issue. It's really the data that we want to load, that we want to preload. It's what that format looks like. Is that the county?
This is Lake County, yeah.
So this is Lake County, so there you have, assessed valuation, right? So, okay, they have, one where you can go to tax,
You want
yeah, there
this
you go,
one.
yeah. So they have links, and there you have,
Pictures.
yeah, a picture, and you have information about the property address, its legal, its neighborhood number, the class, so there's a whole bunch of stuff in the county database.
So that's a link.
That's a link, that's already
Okay,
there.
so that-
But it
that
doesn't
gets you-
have to,
that
if
gets
we
you-
want it, we can put it into our base template.
Well, but
Point
that-
is, it exists.
If you
go
put
to
it, if you
text.
put it into the template, then we have to update it. If you link it, they can update it as it works.
I would think it would be a
Okay,
link.
So it ends up being a link because they're the keepers of the data. We're not gonna copy their data every time it comes over,
Smart
So-
point.
okay? So, but that ends up with the first photograph of the picture, of the house. And so then we need to start loading in, we need an app that will accept JPEGs, will accept photographs, okay? And so then you keep building onto this. Do we have the money to do that? Do we need to hire a programmer person? As I said, can the Evanston people show us the way to the promised land? Is there other
This was
entities?
done by a series of volunteers in Evanston.
Okay.
I don't
feel
know
like
how the
Glenn has a
template,
pretty good handle on it.
yeah, I don't know how the template was designed. I believe, well, it's the Illinois Urban Architectural and Historical Survey. It's their template. So that's the basic template that they used. The information was filled in by a group of volunteers. I can find out more about how they did it.
Sure.
But the actual, there's very little programming. I mean, this isn't a computer issue, this is loading the right data.
You gotta,
You know, getting photographs
Data entry.
added to it is simple. It's just attaching it to the right place.
You need
How to do
somebody who
it.
can just type.
Who can do
how
it?
to do it,
Yeah.
Data
What's the
entry,
time to
it's
just-
data entry.
how to do it.
Yeah.
And I tell you, at least as far as the surveys of the village that have been done to date, and what you're seeing up here is, on the right is
That's what it
the
is.
survey form from the survey, on the left is the same material. We can link
So-
to the form, you can just see it right here.
This,
whatever
this
we do.
form over here is now the type of thing that goes into the database as a PDF. There's no reason to re-keystroke all of that.
Yep.
You just add it in as a PDF, and as long as you leave the thing unlocked, then people can copy the data off of it. And so then it becomes fungible.
So I guess it's a good question, but it is less technical than I had expected it to be, and it is.
I'm not assuming that it's overly technical. I want to know, I got the
Where
keys.
we can get it,
I got the
yeah.
key stuck in the ignition and I want to start the engine.
Okay, so now let's back up.
We don't have-
What we're attempting, what this document is attempting to do is recommend to the village a series of interventions that would be available to individuals in those 3 states when, I think, hopefully this group thinks, when they're ready to make a decision. You know, the first one is, I wanna buy a house, and that's, is at a very high level, let's get you into Lake Bluff, and let's get people who are interested in, you know, what Lake Bluff offers. Those are the people that we want to influence to get here. The second point is, I wanna be in Lake Bluff, and that's where this comes in a great deal, which, you know, which house do I want? Do I wanna rehab it? What are all the things that I need to know in order to make that decision? And then the last thing is, do I rehab it, or do I tear it down? So what I'm suggesting is that I think this works in terms of a master vision, something like this, not to say this is the one. But if we're gonna go to the village board, I'd rather go to the village board with, here's a master vision for quote-unquote historic preservation. Here's a series of interventions that we would like to put together over the next 10 years. And get approval of the concepts, and then we can start prioritizing. And this would be one that we would want to do right away. But we'd also go, so that's kind of the front end, we'd also go to the back end with the, you know, the building things that are existing here. That's kind of what I was thinking.
I like it. I think you put a ton of thought into
Yeah.
putting all of our conversations into the document, and thank you. I think it's great. There, you know, there's still details and more conversations, but
So who wants, how do we move this forward? And deliberately a bunch of mores and dots, and so, do we all take a stab at this? The 2 of you? That's the most we can have in a committee, form a subcommittee and flesh this out a little more? How do we want to proceed?
When you ask how do we want to move it forward, are you talking about having a more detailed document? Or are we talking about beginning to have conversations with some of the people who
Having a more
make-
detailed document that we can present ultimately to the village board, but that we can have as a discussion draft. This would need to go to, you know, ABR and PCCBA and lots of other, whatever the other residential ad hoc committee is. But so that there are fewer mores and there's more specificity here, so that we have a document that we can agree on. And there are a lot of wiggle words in here. And we need to decide if we want the wiggle words or we don't want the wiggle words, and, you know. I'm for one, I've been sitting on commissions like this for a lot of years, And I, for one, I'm not gonna start something like this unless there is a master plan as to how this fits into the context of what we're looking, and that the village board has put their imprimatur on it, and makes it their own. Otherwise, we just, you know, we get frustrated like a lot of us have gotten at times. So that's when I say, what are the next steps? I'd like to get a more fleshed out document that we can then review, you know, next month if we can.
You know what I would suggest, Steve,
Yeah.
is maybe a sampling instead of, here's the whole deal. Because that's just a Herculean effort. But right now, you said we've got 25, we just did our 25. Okay, there's a place to start. Pick them out, put them on there, put all the info on there. And maybe that's enough just to start.
You know, what I've been using is just Evanston. Whenever I've been showing this to a lot of people, and
Yeah.
I pull up Evanston and say, here's what we want in Lake Bluff. I mean, I don't think we have to do anything to
Oh,
show what
okay,
that
well, that's-
document is. But it's more the context of how that tool fits into the idea of a communication initiative that attracts and informs individuals about Lake Bluff and about, you know, what.
To me, that tool is the lead-in.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm in California and about to be transferred, and my cousin has a nephew that's got a friend that lives in Lake Bluff. And I'm gonna look it up, and boom.
Yeah, and
Then
you,
there's just a-
so
I say
you,
I can't afford to live there, although I'm coming from California, so maybe I can.
well, and there, if you notice there,
Downsize.
there is, as one of the attributes, there is, how did I put that? Well, housing market, I have some economics in here, because just thinking of that, if there's somebody coming from California and they, you know, how do we give them a sense of what
So,
pricing ranges are? So, yes,
what is this? What is this?
it's,
Is this like one huge brochure?
no, this is an internal Lake Bluff
I mean,
discussion
what's
piece.
the end product of all of this?
The end product are probably 20 different documents, 20 different things.
But they start with this.
Well, they start, that is an important part of it, but we don't have, go back to number 1A, we don't have all this stuff. We don't have information like Aurora has that talks about the amenities and living in Lake Bluff, talks about the demographics, the attributes. How do you know what, you know, what's the age range in here? How many school-age kids are there? What, you know, you have to probe on the website if you can find it at all, how many kids are in 6th grade? The fact that we only have one middle school, the fact that we have one elementary school, that kids go to Lake Forest, that's not in one place, and I think we need it in one place. The fact that 51% of the land area in Lake Bluff is parks or open space. That's nowhere. That's something that's nowhere that needs to be there. That's an important piece. That's shocking, you know, that there's that much open space in a fully developed suburban Chicago community. So there are lots of documents that need to be pulled together. I'm hesitant to start doing any of it until we have some agreement about all of it, that we're going to do this. Because we've, you know, we all know, we could start on this computer thing, it would be cool, it would be sitting out there, but I think its value is how it's linked. Its value is that, remember, this isn't in the first section of my intervention, by the way, this is in the second section. When I want to be in Lake Bluff. That's when you start looking for individual properties, although maybe it is in the first one. And we can entice people who are awed by our sophistication and use of technology.
So you have laid all of this out and are talking about this would be amazing information, and I think it would be. I think you've done a superlative job of pulling all the different pieces together for people who are thinking about coming in. But that same information would be good for people who are already living here
Absolutely.
too,
Sure.
right? So
Sure.
that would serve many
It
purposes.
would serve many purposes. And it's sort of the, you know, basic, some of the background stuff is the basic stuff that doesn't change all that much.
Well, some of this you gather by going to the schools and saying, cough up some information. You go to the Park District and say, what do you have?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So,
But you're asking for a step like way before any of that, which is to edit a document that we can give to the village board and say,
Here's
do we
what,
have buy-in? for
so
this?
Village Board, you have asked
Any
us
work
to
is done.
define, quote, historic preservation, unquote, in the context of modern Lake Bluff. Here's what we think will do it. And here are the 15 things that we need to work on over the next decade. Because it's gonna take that long to get all this done. Maybe not. I don't think any of us will be on this board when this is all done, but maybe we will.
isn't this the board for life?
Now, if you, I don't know, I keep going
It's
off
starting
and
to
coming
feel
back
like it.
on. So that's my view of this, if you guys have other views, but I'm hesitant to start something, and obviously since we don't have any funding, to figure out how things happen, and much of this is gonna have to be driven through supervised volunteer activity, I would think, or consultants. You know, if we're serious about some of this, there are people who can do this. A lot of this is PR, a lot of this is standard PR stuff on the front end. And on the back end, there's information available, you know, neighborhoods and that, you know, there's people who need to be tasked with doing it. So I'll stop talking.
You know, there's been articles written about Lake Bluff, magazine articles, you know, the Third Coast articles, whatever they are, that give a general overview of what this town is like. My fear is that this is great stuff, but it's very complicated for an opener.
So you're thinking for an opener to do something like Lake Bluff at a glance?
Well, that's something like that,
Something
yeah.
like that.
Something to grab you, to get your attention.
Like that? That's what we have now for Lake Bluff Plains.
Couldn't resist since you said the
But see,
exact
that's
word.
very dry, that's
that's
very
just
dry.
statistics.
You need, you need something with some pictures and some
I know.
pizzazz, yeah.
So maybe the place after,
Couldn't resist.
and maybe I'm just going down, I don't know why, maybe I'm just going down this road and we need to get buy-in from the village board. But maybe we really do start with a map, because it is fun.
It's addictive.
It's
I'm
addictive.
gonna say, where's my house?
Yeah, it's exactly what you do. You go to find, you know, and you find all kinds of interesting things, and all of a sudden it's midnight, you know? Gosh, that's got all.
Something I had suggested quite a couple of years ago anyway, was to contact, and now his name just went out of my head, the gentleman in town that did the school, the film.
Oh, Craig?
Craig, yeah. What a PR piece. He was excellent at that.
He was.
Yeah, obviously he's interested in, do you
I
know
think
him?
there's gonna be,
Craig? Sure.
once he launches his book too, I think
Yeah.
there might be some real attention coming to Lake
Yeah.
Bluff again too.
Yeah.
You're aware he has a book coming out this fall? on
Oh,
the-
it's
on the
this
mur-
month.
Murder in Lake Bluff.
Yeah.
It's this month.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's called
Yeah,
Furnace.
Furnace Girl, yeah.
Furnace girl?
Furnace.
That's not good publicity.
Yeah.
Well,
You
the
know
story's
that
good, though.
Mrs. Hitchcock, I mean, that house is behind my
Is
house,
that really?
but she
Yeah, in this
then
building.
moved to the house next door.
There was a murder.
And she was
Or
there,
is that the one
she
downstairs?
lived there when we moved in.
Really?
Did
And
she really?
Oh, yeah, and she had, we're talking 40-some years ago. She had a stack of tires in her backyard, well, I had probably two. And every day, she would come out with bags of garbage and burn them. And she was a wiry little old lady. I mean, she was
That's the
well
old
into
Lake,
her
that's the old,
90s then.
that's the old Lake Bluff tradition. Everybody burned their garbage.
Yeah,
In their backyard?
in the backyard.
Okay, so maybe, I'm looking for two people who might be interested in taking another look at this. And maybe it needs to be shorter. Maybe instead of this, maybe this is the bigger document, and we say, here are the 15 things that we're actually interested in the village producing. Without, you know, who's gonna pay for it, who's gonna do it, but these are, again, I don't wanna go too far down thinking about and starting to do things until the people who will have to pay for this to the degree that they're paying for it, have to do it. So let's pause there. I'm gonna come back to this. I've got two people that I'm looking for. And let's go to put up the Benjamin thing. So, we are close to finalizing a contract, that the village board will review for completing the historic survey of Lake Bluff, and you wanna get that map up. So the idea here is that, we complete, the historic survey. So go ahead, explain the colors.
Sure, and we'll come back to start here. So looking at the colors again, green dots, there's a few omissions for technical reasons, but indicate things that have been caught up by surveys in the past. So this portion here, if you can see my mouse pointer here on the right, this portion generally was done in the first survey of Lake Bluff, the original survey in 2002 or what have you. This was called the Southeast Survey Area. We did, and this was in the original survey as well. We did an odd, what seems to me, looking back, and sort of an odd collection of estate sites as well, maybe because of the sense that they were being threatened here along what I would call this Green Bay Road corridor. This was about the time Stonebridge was happening, as well as the Keck and Keck demolition.
And the Abram Pool House also,
Boy, they're going to town with that.
yeah. Which
I
is
don't
a-
even know what that is, I
Oh,
confess.
it's north on Green Bay Road.
Okay.
It's the David Adler House that's getting rehabbed.
Oh, yes, here,
The-
here. Yeah,
With all the cats.
I've heard of this.
So the green dots are where we have information. Some of it's 10 years old now, but we have the basic backbone of the structures.
And a few here up on Shore Acres and one at the end.
Yeah, anything that's blue, or is green, yeah.
From there, we sort of have, you can think of it as a Venn diagram, if you would, two circles. Blue is this sense of places that we just want to go through and go house by house. Yeah. Blue is areas that we think we've captured the history of already elsewhere in one of these other survey products. We just missed the houses, especially some of these are just misses.
So my surprise, my bad, I thought we had everything south of Crabtree, east of Sheridan Road,
I thought so too.
but we didn't.
Crabtree is white, and then there's Blodgett, Woodland, and Washington.
So
That's
the
first
survey
blue.
So those are
ended,
the newer.
My neighborhood.
the survey ended at North Avenue, the
Yeah.
north side of North Avenue, so
Right.
this proposal would cover everything up to Blodgett. It also didn't include Indian Road and that area south for some reason,
Indian Hill.
So that's what I thought was already completed, but isn't. There are also some individual properties. There's some properties on Gurnee, for example, that were omitted in the original survey, so they'll go back and do those. So if you think of tranches of work, currently, that's one, is to complete the east side of the village.
Sure.
So then, what's the purple?
We'll get to the purple. So the opposite idea, I think the purple makes sense as the sum of the other two. The opposite idea is these red areas, are not things that maybe people consider historic yet. It's Tangley Oaks, it's Armor Woods, it's the Sanctuary. I think there may be a few other. That's it. So places that aren't historic yet, where there wouldn't be a lot of value in going house by house or really digging deep, but where we want to at least capture the development history, capture how they came to be, capture the essential information that helps put them in the context of the village and how we developed over the last 100 years.
So for those three areas specifically, there will not be house-to-house surveys. There will be a developmental history that's written, and to the degree feasible, the models, especially in Tangley, the models will be identified so that we can use the models that were used to sell the homes as the historic linchpin in building the future discussion of development. And we may want to look at what those models were in terms of giving them whatever special status that the village might want to give them. Might be cool. So when you pull up, when you buy into Tangley and you pull up on our brand new spanking new map, when Bob looks around there and he pulls one up and it says, this was one of the original models. I mean, that gives it a certain sense of interest. So that's what those areas, that's the intent for those areas.
And finally, if blue is your one circle in your Venn diagram, red is the other, purple's the sum. It's these areas that we haven't really touched at all. They are sufficiently old enough, have sufficient history where you want to go house by house. We also really haven't looked into their development, their history, their culture, any of that. The gap is the widest to be bridged there, and really we think also in our conversations with Susan Benjamin, the principal of the firm doing this work, that these are sort of the biggest opportunities as well. How this discussion originally started and what we think will still be at the heart of this work product is a real focus around the terraces, around post-war development in Lake Bluff. So thinking about the North Terrace, especially some of the very original homes in there that were built around, thinking about the East Terrace and the West Terrace. Those are very, as our Maple House from last month is an example of this mid-century design style, in some cases of a more modern design style, certainly more modern amenities, even if the architecture doesn't match that. We have some of the original marketing materials, some of the original owners, the original models. Very rich story, and again, probably in terms of our documentation, the least documented areas in Lake Bluff.
So the idea here, and I've put nomenclature to this just to make it easier for the consultant, and we'll need to figure out what the right nomenclature is, but what we call the North Terrace is north of 176, east of Green Bay, so it's right there. That's what I call north. Then you go down to the south, west of Green Bay Road is the West Terrace, east of Green Bay Road is the East Terrace, and then below the railroad tracks is Bath and Tennis. So those are kind of the areas. The idea, as Glenn said, is that not only house-to-house survey like we've done in the past and a history of the development of the area, but again, a focus on the models. And we do have some absolutely fascinating information of the models that were developed for the West Terrace. And we can identify some of those models, some of those homes that still exist. So that's the focus for the purple areas. The purple areas on the north are house-to-house that's, what's the one, the furthest north street, what is that?
Signey Court?
Yeah, Signey Court, Belforet, which was a planned development, and then the only road, non-paved road in the village is Thorn Valley. So we'll do those. Campbell Court, which is up there. That was also a planned development, so there'll be a little bit of history, but and that's pretty straightforward in terms of house-to-house. So, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, when you're talking about that, like our neighborhood, my father-in-law designed and built our house, and we have the original plans, because we
So-
bought it from them.
so-
But there's a neighborhood of people who were there when it first started, and, people in the neighborhood can go up and down the street like you can, Paul, and say like, oh yeah, that's, Tommy Goodman built that house, or so-and-so built that house, and
So-
designed that, and.
Yeah, so in discussions with some folks using, it's amazing when you carry your laptop around and at a cocktail party, pull up the Evanston Historic District and start talking about it, and most people get really interested in it. And based on that conversation, we want to have a functionality of being able to upload original floor plans and drawings and documents. So that the current homeowner can actually upload information that they have on their home. And if there is information, and if they want to, who owned the home next door? And, when I moved into my house in 1975, the lady that we bought the house from made a drawing of all the property that surrounded mine with a little handwritten history of all the people who lived there.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and all their kids and where they lived, and all of that stuff needs to be, and that is doable, just as an attachment. So the areas that we're not going to do much with right now, if you go up, is Shore Acres. It is, and it's identified as blue, but we're probably not gonna do house-to-house in there. Partially, it's an access issue. Partially, it's also an economic issue. There's not a lot of structures there, so we think we'll talk about that as a development, but not really do a significant house-to-house with that.
I just received from Susan Benjamin a newspaper article from 1937, which talks in depth, about 3 paragraphs in depth, about developing the 80 acres at Shore Acres.
Great.
Talks about all the landowners, talks about all of the parcels of land and stuff.
Yeah.
I can fill in a lot of the blue dots up there just by sending the article along.
And that was my,
Yeah.
my thought as well, that we can probably do that. We're also including in this, we're not including, so the downtown commercial district has already been identified. We're not doing anything in the commercial park. But we are going to make certain that we have certain buildings part of the survey. That would be the water intake plant and the water treatment plant. Certainly Mariani, which was the stone company, and certainly Knaus, which was the Johnson Door Company, the Hyundai building, and the electric substation, that was Sam Insull's substation that ran the power and the interurban. I think that's all, but there are some industrial buildings that we'll have identified. So when this is all finished, and it'll stretch into early next year before we finally get a report, but we'll have in that format information on the vast majority of houses and structures within the village.
So it seems to me that it would be fabulous in a perfect world that we would have a paid historian person that could manage and do all these things. I'm going someplace with it, I'm not gonna ask the village. But because in my world of the nonprofit world, all we do is talk about grants, giving grants out, or, you know, there are government grants. I'm sure there must be historical grants. I think that there are probably foundations that give grants for historical things. And you could get a 2 or 3 year grant to somebody that you could actually hire to do that kind of work for us.
And sources of funding are certainly important. This document, in my mind, is designed to answer the question of what will that person do.
I
that's
just was
why-
taking it down the road a bit, like,
Yeah.
so when we say like, great, the village board thinks this is a really good idea, everybody's all in, so now, who's gonna do it? And that always comes up, so,
So grants are certainly some. The educational community, Lake Forest College certainly has there are urban history and urban planning schools where there are students that are looking for research opportunities. So there's all kinds of ways to.
internships.
Yeah, so I think we have to do that, but it'd be really nice to say, here are the 15 things that we want done. So this is one, and that will, the survey will be finished, so we'll have that basic piece of information. So I'll go back to what's our next step on the interventions, as I call it, the interventions document. Somebody want to take a stab at filling out the mores and redoing the words? And 2 of you can meet without having a public meeting?
Somebody needs to be an author. So this isn't a statistical.
Yeah.
The ability to actually write.
Yeah.
That ain't me.
Well, and unfortunately, I'm back down working downtown, and so my time has become very precious, and in a few minutes, I'm out of here anyway, because my clock has run, so the 6:02 train comes awfully early in the morning, so.
Tell me.
All right, so what's the pleasure?
Oh,
What's our next
I
step?
meant the train's not getting out of here, sorry.
So,
What's our next step?
Wow. Don't everybody jump up at once?
And how soon do you want this, next month? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, whenever, we're all volunteers here, whenever we can have if people are comfortable with this the way it is, I can make it prettier, and maybe the way to do it is just for all of you, give you some homework, and all of you edit this.
Oh, but
And
then
get
you
it-
have to put six
get it
edits
back.
together.
With
I said,
different
then you have to
verbiage.
put
I can do
six
that,
edits
that's okay.
together.
I'd be happy to do that. I mean, in terms of writing some of this stuff, I'm a decent initial writer of things.
I don't think the wordsmithing is the problem. It's just a matter of, there's an awful lot of conceptual stuff here that, I'm still, in my own mind, I'm puzzling over a lot of the pieces of this.
So maybe.
Okay, I'll work on it. I'll take the number one spot,
Okay.
if somebody else will work on it with me.
So we have,
Janie will work on it with me.
so the two free passes are, maybe maybe a way to do this, I'm sure everybody has, you have a couple days to look at this, and we've talked about it a bit, but maybe the thing to do is for everybody to think more about it. And next month, even though it's August and we often don't meet in August, but next month we come in and just spend an hour and a half, and unless we have another petitioner, which is unlikely, get our questions answered. So if you've got conceptual issues, let's make sure that we're comfortable with what I meant by these words, and that we have consensus and that we're in agreement on what this document means, and then we can go into making it more into a presentation format. Maybe it's a PowerPoint instead of a document.
I think probably.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So for the second month in a row, we're not gonna talk about, what do you wanna talk about? Heritage lots. Do you wanna just give a quick 30 seconds on what a heritage lot is, so that maybe we wanna talk about it next time?
Sure, let me take slightly more than 30 seconds, but not too much.
You have 2.5 minutes.
2.5 minutes, I'll give you that. So, heritage lots is an idea that's been bouncing around with us as staff for a while. It's one we talked about a bit in this group. It's one the RBC has talked about a bit. I would summarize it in two ways. And let's call it the lesser hypothesis and the greater hypothesis, right? Very academic, I know. The lesser one, the one that I think there's a lot of agreement about, the one that is very easy to understand, is that according to zoning, these little tiny lots, these 25-footers, these 30-footers, so on, in most of town, you need at least 7,500 square feet to have a buildable lot. So as happened with 512 Sunrise, as you may recall, if two of these enter into common ownership, they can't be built on anymore without seeking a variation. In practice, it'd be very hard to prove the need to have to be able to build two houses there. The zoning code is designed to not allow lots of this size to exist or be built on, particularly because of their size, but also because of the practicalities of their setbacks, floor area ratio. Even though there's some gradation and some thoughtful things done to insulate some of these smaller lots, many of the things we've done to control bulk, to control overbuilding on lots, have affected your ability to build here. So that has a good side, which is because you can't tear it down and build anything else, those lots have been very well protected. Can't do anything else on them. But the downside is it's tremendously difficult to build an addition, to rebuild, to do many things that would in any way alter the envelope of the house. And so there's been some question, philosophically, is that the way it should be? And then practically, can you make these houses attractive? Can you get better results? So on and so forth, if you treat them differently. Knowing there's only a few houses that meet this narrow definition, no pun intended, of being less than 50 feet wide. The greater hypothesis, the one of which, there's not a lot of consensus about in the village, or a consensus in the opposite direction. And Chairman Kraus, I hope you'll stand between me and Paul Bergman as I just start to discuss this. But one of the interesting things one of the things I always encourage people with my zoning hat on to think about is, if we started from scratch and you followed the zoning code, do you get the product you want, you desire, that makes our town unique and consequential? If you started over with the rules as they are today, there are 4 houses here. There are 4 equally spaced houses. There are no 25-foot wide lots. There are no narrow town cottages. It looks like one of these houses, maybe one of these, maybe one of these, and, you know, I mean, even that's too, I think even that's too small, so this would be a little smaller, this would be a little bigger, very uniform. And so,
How boring.
yeah, well, maybe, maybe not, but, Paul, I quote you a couple months ago, I think, when you say that a lot of the funky charm comes from these small houses and things that are oddly situated on lots and things that you can't do under the zoning code as it exists today. And so as we think about it, as we think about the character of our community and, you know, as you're building, as we're looking at people that are building new things in old places, can you, does it make sense to allow people, and can you do it rationally to protect what's here, but can you, if someone wanted to build a new 25-foot wide house, is there any situation under which we'd let them? Things like that. So I think that was 2.5 minutes.
One of the things that's, that,
Oh,
something
bad
that's
sense of
not,
time.
that is, makes some of those maybe worth keeping, aside from everything you just said, is the affordability of them.
There you go.
You know, I mean, one of the things on this list, you know, you asked me, I talked to other people who are out of town that said, I'd love to live in Lake Bluff, can't afford it, and if I could, I can't afford the taxes.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's, but some of these, you know, a brand-new family, they could deal with that.
They used to be really good starter homes. One of those was
That's my
first
point.
Lake
You lived
Bluff
in
house.
one.
Yeah.
And I looked at the one next door to you for $15,000 before I bought the house I'm in now.
But that
The flip
little
side
but
of
I
that.
think ours was the last house sold in Lake Bluff, under $100,000.
Yeah, maybe so. The flip side of that is that these 4 little houses that you're talking about are that and yours, and 1 or 2 over on North Avenue are the last of the camp meeting houses.
Right.
And those are the ones that we desperately want to have landmarks, because they do represent a very distinct period of our history. We ought to be talking to those people and saying, yeah, we'll help you fix up your house. We're not going to let you make it any bigger, but we'll let you fix up your house. And we've talked about giving tax breaks and whatnot, tax freezes and whatnot. Those are the houses that we want to have as landmarks.
Right, and there's no way to make them bigger.
And you can't make
I
them.
could reach out to the neighbor next
Yeah,
door
and you
and grab
can't,
a
you can't make them any bigger,
No.
and you sure as heck don't want them hanging a brand-new gable on the front of the thing, because then you've wiped away all of the camp meeting indicia and whatnot, so. But some of those houses are pretty rickety on the inside,
Or a
but,
little crooked.
so,
But
I'm
they're
gonna go,
charming.
guys.
They are.
And for a young family, you know, I mean, they're not gonna have the open floor plan.
Paul, one last,
Good night, everybody.
you give me 10 more seconds? Oh, my goodness. So if
Oh, we
you,
have to close the meeting.
you have to close the meeting, and there's one more thing. So speaking of this, this is at zoning next Wednesday. This is the very thing we're talking about. This is actually at the lot we're looking at. This is 419 Prospect Moffett. This is a quasi-historic house, certainly a recognizable element of the village.
That was already before us, right?
Right.
It was, and they weren't able to follow through with the plan they proposed. They're back to the idea of stripping it down to the original house, building a couple additions, and then so you'd create a new 50-foot wide lot, and then creating a 75-foot wide lot.
Having 2 homes then?
Yeah. So if you want to see that discussion play out in real life, come on by next Wednesday, hang out.
Ooh,
Wow.
good night.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn. Second.
Too bad.
All in favor?
Aye.
So they weren't able to